Alright, I am back with another build, and today we're going to be exploring a little bit of my childhood nostalgia. I have been a huge fan of the Sonic the Hedgehog series ever since I was, I would say, 9 years old or so. I played all of the games from around kind of the Wii era from around that time, so let's say like Sonic Colors, Unleashed, all of that sort of thing. Any Sonic game I could get my hands on, I would play. And, I've always had a soft spot for the series. Obviously, as an adult, I kind of put it on the back burner to do other things, and I came back with Sonic Frontiers, which was an amazing game, and the more recent Shadow Generations was just absolutely top tier, one of my favourite games of all time, and not to mention the kind of resurgence of Sonic in the public eye in general, thanks to the movies, which I recently saw Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in theatres, and that movie absolutely blew my mind. I had such a fun time with it. So Sonic has been at the forefront of my mind for, I would say, the past month or so. And, when Spud over on the Discord said, hey, when are we going to get a Sonic build to complement the Mario one, I was just like, you know what, bet, let's do it. Because I've wanted to do a Sonic the Hedgehog build in Baldur's Gate 3 for a while now, or at least one that's inspired by him. Obviously, we don't have a, hedgehog race in the game, but so I wanted to bring that to Baldur's Gate 3 somehow, by getting as much movement speed as possible, but also somehow turning that movement speed into combat power, which at the time, when I first started this channel, this was how early this kind of thought was, I didn't actually know how to do that. Now, though, I do. Now, you may think, oh, well, of course he's going to use mods. Well, actually, no, this build is entirely vanilla, because it's mainly martial focused. The modded build will be the Shadow build, when, Blade Singer comes out. Wait for that one. But, so I wanted to kind of use my current knowledge to make what I think is a powerful, and I mean powerful, we're going to be power building today, kind of build that uses movement speed to gain that power. So this is going to be a really fun build. I quite enjoyed coming up with it. There are definitely various tweaks you can make throughout the build depending on what kind of playstyle you want to go for, but I just said, screw it, I want to get as much power in a single hit as I can from increasing our speed. And that's going to seem weird, how are we going to do that? Long-time members of the channel may already have an idea, but I think you guys are really going to like this build when it's all said and done, because, I got to build one of my favourite characters of all time. Well, not Shadow, but Sonic is a close second. Anyways, let's get right into the build, enough rambling. So first up, you have a choice. You can start as Monk or Rogue, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you're getting long sword proficiency early on. We want it pretty much from level 1, as a longsword is going to be our main weapon of choice, taking inspiration from Sonic and the Black Knight. So we definitely want to make sure we get longsword proficiency somehow, whether that means you play as an elf for their racial ability to get that proficiency, or you start off as a rogue, that's entirely up to you. I am going to be kicking things off as a rogue today to be able to get longsword proficiency regardless of race, as well as being able to pick up the skill proficiencies, because I do want those. So we'll be starting off as rogue today, which is going to give us sneak attack. And since we are using a finesse weapon with this build, we are actually going to get to use sneak attack on our attacks, which is really nice. It's going to be more power for the build, because again, we're going to be running up to enemies at the speed of sound, suddenly surprise attacking them, and yeah, I think that constitutes a sneak attack even if we're not necessarily being stealthy. So sneak attack is going to be a bit of extra damage on one of our attacks per turn, so we absolutely want to grab that. For our race, we are going to be playing as an elf today. This is just so I can show off the ability to get longsword proficiency regardless of which class you start with if you want to. But elf is also going to give us a few things because we are going to be playing as a wood elf. We're going to get them regular base movement speed, as well as dark vision and fey ancestry. You guys all know what these do, as well as the wood elf ability to increase our movement speed by an additional 1.5 meters. Next up, our ability scores. Yes, they look weird, trust me, I understand, but it will make sense as we go on with the build, because unfortunately, in order to power build this build to be as strong as I want it to be, we are going to have to use stat boosting equipment in some form. These are the final stats of the build. This is what you're going to be respecing into when you kind of hit Act 3. However, I will be discussing the kind of starter stats for the start of the game as well. Going to be kicking things off with, for your respec stats, strength at 17. Yes, we're going to be bumping up with a half feat later. You probably already know the one since you know we're going with monk levels. Dexterity is at 16. This is going to help with our armor class and our initiative. It may feel wrong to make a Sonic build with dexterity kind of middling, But again, you can kind of sub out, let's just say it, Tavern Brawler, which we're going to be getting later on to add more power to our unarmed strikes, with just dumping your strength and putting more into dex and other stats if you want to make more of a dexterity-based monk. But like I said, I wanted power, and Sonic is no slouch. He is certainly strong. His attacks can deal massive amounts of damage if he stops holding back, again, turning that speed into strength. So I felt like strength was appropriate for this build, so we've got a decent amount of strength and a decent amount of dex to start. Constitution is at 8 because by the time you're finished with this build, you are going to be using the Amulet of Greater Health to bump up your Constitution to a 23 and give you advantage on concentration saving throws, as we are going to want those a bit later. So overall, yes, we're going to have this at 8 by the time we get that amulet, but to start, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be, maybe, I would say, dumping strength probably entirely, and just making kind of a more standard dexterity-based kind of monk build, swapping out strength for constitution here and bumping up your dexterity a bit higher instead. So I would say your starting stats would probably look something a bit more akin to, let's grab this, go like that, and go like that. This is what your starting stats are more likely going to look like, something along these lines, but then obviously you'll respec to what I have laid out here when you actually do respec eventually. Or you could use the gloves of dexterity if you want instead, which I have suggested for this build later on. So you will have a few options available to you. Obviously we can discuss that in a minute, but yes. So that is kind of what our respec stats are going to look like, but you should kind of know how to build a standard character for level 1. Intelligence is at 8. Sonic's not an idiot, but he's not the smartest either, and we just don't need intelligence. Wisdom is at 14. I would like this higher to power our monk features like our unarmed defense a bit more, but unfortunately sacrifices do have to be made. You can use things like the Mirror of Loss in Act 3 to bump this up if you really want to, or maybe dump your charisma, put your wisdom up, and use the Hair of Auntie-Ethel, but Sonic wouldn't be making deals with dark mirrors and, you know, swamp hags. He's a bit more heroic than that, shall we say. So I think wisdom being at 14 is fine. It's still going to serve the build perfectly well, but feel free to use optimization tactics to bump this up if you like. And charisma is at 10 because I can't put Sonic's charisma at 8, but we really just don't need it for this build, but I can't bring myself to put it anything lower than a 10. So for our skill proficiencies, we get a lot. Not only are we a wood elf rogue, which just gives us a ton of proficiencies as well, we also get to use the folk hero background, which is going to give us survival and animal handling, both of which make perfect sense for Sonic. He lives out in the wilds, and his whole thing was saving small animals, so I think having animal handling does make sense. And obviously folk hero means that if we do heroic deeds, we gain inspiration, which of course we want to be doing here. But because we are an elf, we're also getting perception as well, and because we're a wood elf, we're getting stealth. Yeah, we get a lot of stuff at level 1 here, plus the fact that we get to choose 4 skills and 2 expertise because we're a rogue. My chosen skills of choice are persuasion because I do want some charisma-based skills. You can go for deception here, but honestly I would maybe swap that for something else, like maybe performance or intimidation. I don't think Sonic is really a liar, but he definitely has deceived people in the past. Sonic Adventure 2 Fake Chaos Emerald cutscene, so I think deception is okay, and you do just kind of want to have that just in case. I've also gone with insight because he's very good at reading people, and he has to keep up with, you know, kind of being able to look at things while moving at high speeds. I don't know. Insight, I feel like just is like a nice filler perk, as well as athletics. We will have some strength-based pushing shenanigans in this build, so I feel like having athletics is a good thing. It's also going to help with our jump distance as well, so I definitely wanted to make sure we had athletics on this build, and as such I did throw expertise onto it, but you may feel like that's unnecessary, and I put expertise onto persuasion as well, so that we at least have a +4 even with our lower charisma score, because I definitely wanted persuasion on this build at least. So yeah, I would say these are a perfectly fine set of skills, but feel free to change them around as you feel is necessary. Next up, at this point, obviously seeing that bonus action dash makes it tempting to take level 2 of Rogue right away, but I do want to get our Monk stuff first, so we're going to be multiclassing straight over into Monk. Monk is going to give us a ton of stuff right at level 1. We're obviously going to get Flurry of Blows, Unarmored Defense, Dexterous Attacks using our Dex instead of our Strength, but we're still going to be using our Strength. We're going to gain better deft strikes, so we're going to gain a higher damage die for our unarmed strikes, as well as the ability to make an attack with a bonus action after we attack with a monk weapon or an unarmed strike. Our longsword is going to be a monk weapon for us, so that is going to work out perfectly, so we'll be able to attack with a bonus action pretty much whenever we like. At Monk level 2, we're going to gain increased unarmored movement, so this means that we're going to get even more movement speed while not wearing any armor, which we're not for this build, so this is perfect. We're also going to get the ability to use Patient Defense and Step of the Wind dash and disengage. So obviously Step of the Wind dash is another bonus action dash, so we are still getting that, although this one does use a key point, which kind of sucks, but hey, getting a bonus action dash in some shape or form for this build is better than none. We're also going to get Patient Defense, like I said, which is going to make it so attack rolls against us have disadvantage. We are the blue blur, we move so fast that it's hard to keep up with us, so people having disadvantage to hit us makes a ton of sense. At Monk level 3, you get to choose your subclass. In addition to that, you're also going to get the Deflect Missiles feature, allowing you to reduce the damage from a ranged weapon attack by 1d10 plus your dex mod, and if the damage is reduced to 0, you can use a key point to throw the missile back. I mean, come on, how many times has Sonic grabbed one of Eggman's missiles and chucked it back at him? Like, this is too perfect for this build, we definitely want it. But for your subclass, now there's an argument to be made, in my opinion, for Way of the Four Elements and Way of the Open Hand. Way of the Four Elements is definitely a fun option. You can get things like Fist of Unbroken Air to be able to do kind of Sonic's wind attacks that he uses in some of the games, which would definitely feel on the theme, as well as maybe being able to get like Gust of Wind to be able to push people back and knock them off balance with the sheer force of your movement past them, something along those lines. Thunder Wave can also do something similar, and you could also get like Touch the Storm, because obviously in like the movies and in some of the games, Sonic's speed does kind of build up electricity, kind of turning his attacks like electric, so you could go with that if you want to get more of a movie Sonic vibe, but we'll still kind of be getting that a bit later anyway, so I don't think you really need that here. So I do think there is room for Way of the Four Elements on this build, but in my testing, it didn't really work out. I find that you would very rarely use Fist of Unbroken Air, because obviously with our movement speed, we're able to get up close and personal all the time, so having a ranged attack, which ultimately just does less for us overall, especially when it's like a strength save, which the target can resist. So it's like, I don't know, I don't think it's really worth going for the Four Elements here, but I definitely think if you're trying to build a Sonic build, this is a very good way of going about it. However, Open Hand is just so much better for the build and still gets a lot of what we want. Sonic is an incredible martial artist when you really think about it. Well, maybe not martial artist is the wrong word, but hand-to-hand combat for him is definitely a strength. And being able to both topple, stagger, and push his enemies with his martial attacks does make sense, being able to knock them over with his sheer speed, pushing them back by homing attacking into them and just knocking them away, and then staggering them by just kind of, I don't know, hitting them really hard, because let's be honest, if you got hit by a Hedgehog going at, like, you know, at Mach 3, you're probably going to get a bit dazed, let's just say. So I do think it works really, really well, but if you're tired of me using Open Hand Monk all the time, Way of the Four Elements is definitely a way to go. At Monk level 4, we're going to get Slow Fall, meaning that we gain resistance to falling damage. Sonic doesn't really take falling damage in his games at all, so, I mean, if you get Featherfall on this build somehow, then, I mean, go for it, but this at least gives us a little bit. We're also going to be able to choose a feat at this level, and since we are focusing on the monk stuff and are probably primarily using our unarmed strengths at this point, let's grab Tavern Brawler, now bumping up our strength to an 18. This is going to allow us to double our strength modifier when we're on the attack and damage rolls of our unarmed strikes whenever we make an unarmed attack, or use an improvised weapon, or throw something. So basically, we're doubling the damage that we do in a way, which is awesome. It's going to just give us way more damage on all of our attacks, so I absolutely want to pick it up here. At Monk level 5, we're going to be grabbing Extra Attack. This is going to allow us to make an additional free attack after making an unarmed or weapon attack. So easy enough, we just attack with our sword or our unarmed strikes, and then we get to do it again. We're also going to get Stunning Strike, which allows our strikes to potentially save the target, stun the target, I should say, if they fail a con save. Stunning means they just can't do anything. Just literally nothing. So it's a very powerful ability. And at level 6, we're going to get all of the really fun things for this build. We're going to get improved unarmored movement, giving us even more movement speed. Our unarmed strikes now overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. From our open hand monk, we're going to get manifestation of body, mind, and soul. This is going to allow us to add a d4 of necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage, plus our wisdom modifier to all of our attacks. I don't know, it's not a d4, sorry. No, Oh no, it is a D4. Sorry, my apologies, it is. I'm getting so confused today. Otherwise, yeah, so we have these 3 different damage types. I usually stick with Radiant, but if you feel like Sonic's Motor Mouth is going to deal psychic damage, then I can understand you wanting to go with that. We also have Wholeness of Body. This is just going to be entering kind of like our super-powered state. It's kind of similar to what Sonic had in Frontiers and the movies, where he's kind of able to focus, kind of glow a little bit, and gain increased speed and power. Wholeness of Body is going to allow us to do a bit of healing every turn, as well as immediately regaining half of our total key points, which is really good for resource management, and entering a state of wholeness where we have an extra bonus action. Yeah. So we're going to have 2 bonus actions right off the bat. That can be 2 bonus action dashes for more speed. That could be a bonus action dash and patient defense. That could be 2 flurry of blows. This is obviously incredibly powerful. Most of you who have been around the channel long enough know how strong this feature is already, and it's going to just help out our playstyle. It's going to give us more damage, more movement speed, more everything. So we absolutely want to pick this up. Now I would say at this point, let's go back to Rogue for the Rogue levels. Now we're going to be able to get Cunning Action Dash, meaning now we can dash as a bonus action without using a key point, which is super important, as well as being able to hide and disengage. I don't think we'll be hiding so much, but we'll definitely be using disengage quite a bit if we need to get out of our enemy's kind of attack range without them being able to damage us. But dash is the main thing we're going to be using, as this is going to give us both a speed boost and an attack boost by the time this build is done. At level 3 of Rogue, yes, we're going Thief for the Fast Hands feature to get a second bonus action by default. I'm sorry, I know this is boring as hell, but it is the best way, in my opinion, to build what we're trying to build here, and that is an effective speedster. By being able to dash twice with a bonus action all the time, now up to 3 times per turn with Wholeness of Body, you can achieve movement speeds not even thought possible, as well as the fact that, again, this is going to translate into combat power for us. Having these bonus actions is going to be essential for making this build work. I mean, obviously, you don't have to do this if you don't care about having that second bonus action, although you are going to feel the difference. You could throw in levels in something else here, or just go all the way in Monk instead. But trust me, having as many bonus actions as possible in this build is going to help in the long run, so I absolutely recommend picking this up. Back over to Monk now, and with level 7 of Monk we're going to grab Evasion. Whenever a spell or effect would deal half damage on a successful dex save, you take no damage if you succeed, and only half damage if you fail. So overall this just means we're going to be a bit more tanky against things that aren't attack rolls, which is nice, as well as the fact that we're also going to be able to use Stillness of Mind to say if we are charmed or frightened, we automatically cast Stillness of Mind to remove the condition. Our Fey Ancestry with this build already tackles a little bit of that, but it's still nice to have, especially if you decide not to play as an elf or half-elf. And finally, at Monk level 8, we are going to get another feat. Now, this is where you decide if you really want to go overkill or not. Obviously, an ability score improvement here to round out any of our slightly lower stats would definitely feel appreciated on this build. If you want a more well-rounded, slightly more defensive character, I would probably go with maybe a wisdom bump here. However, in my testing, and again, when I said I really wanted to make our attacks feel powerful as a result of our speed, I mean, we're using a longsword, so Great Weapon Master is just too good to pass up. It's going to allow us to deal an additional 10 damage at the cost of a -5 attack roll penalty. And whenever we land a critical hit or kill a target with a melee weapon attack, we can make another melee weapon attack as a bonus action on that turn. And because we're going to be dealing so much damage in a single hit with this build, the likelihood that we're going to be able to kill and then attack with one of our 3 bonus actions using our weapon, or even if not, just using Flurry of Blows or something, yeah, this feels too good to be true. It's one of my most popular and most powerful builds ever was combining Tavern Brawler and Great Weapon Master, and we're here to do it again. And getting this massive power boost right at level 12 feels like a nice capstone to end off the build. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a ton of power and speed. Like, it's pretty damn simple. You get to do absolutely massive amounts of damage with all of our attacks by stacking Great Weapon Master, Charger, and a few things I'll be getting into in a minute. Obviously, we can dash up to 3 times per turn, meaning our movement speed is going to be absolutely in the stratosphere. And again, when we'll get to it in a minute, we're going to be able to turn that movement speed into extra damage as well. Not to mention, we're also going to get sneak attack, which is even more power. We're going to have a ton of battlefield control utility with our various flurry of blows options, as well as stunning strike, and even our defensive options like patient defense and being able to disengage as a bonus action and just move out of combat entirely, forcing enemies to more than likely have to dash to us, means that if you play this build right and use that movement speed to your advantage, you'll be able to get in there, deal massive amount of damage with your attacks, and then just get out, forcing your enemies to come towards you, using their actions to dash in the process. And if they have ranged attacks, like for example you're up against someone using a bow and arrow, you can use deflect missiles on them, and if you're up against someone who's using magic, you've got evasion to get out of those nasty dex saving throws. Yes, wisdom and intelligence saving throws, and like basically those kind of effects where maybe you're under the effect of like hold person or something like that, those could be tricky, so watch out for them. But otherwise, you let your teammates handle those, you get in and get out as you feel is necessary, and hit with devastating power. But let's talk about the weapons and armor and see how we can take this build even further, if I could get the camera right. There we go, that'll do. So, for this build, our weapon of choice is one of two things. You're going to want one of the two finesse longswords in the game to be able to get that sneak attack. If you don't care about sneak attack, then you don't need to worry about that. Any longsword will do, but I do want the extra sneak attack damage as I do feel like it's quite valuable to the build, so you have a choice. You can either go with Larithian's Wrath, which is a +1 finesse longsword, which you can get in Act 1, which comes with the Razor Gale attack, allowing you to do a bit of extra slashing damage and attack all enemies within range. That feels like a very Sonic attack, so I kind of wanted to include it on this build. But with the amount of attacks that we make in a turn, I cannot deny that Falar Aluv is once again one of the best options for this build. It's a +1 weapon by default, but again, I have used a Drake for a Glaive to imbue it with lightning, giving it a +1 overall to make it a +2 and an extra d4 of lightning damage. As well as the fact that it comes with Falar Aluv melody, allowing us to either sing to give all of our allies, a bit of a bump to our attack rolls and, you know, their wisdom, charisma, and intelligence saving throws. So if you want to get a little bit more of a chance to hit, to kind of overcome Great Weapon Master, then you could go with Sing, but Shriek, giving all enemies a d4 penalty to charisma, wisdom, and intelligence saves, as well as taking an extra bit of thunder damage on every attack that hits them. And you think that's 2 attacks from our weapon, maybe up to 3 flurry of blows in a turn, all dealing an extra 1d4 of thunder damage, yet you can't pass it up. It is literally hitting so fast that we break the sound barrier, causing a big thunder shock, and that allows us to bump our enemies in the face. You can actually buff the weapon with Draconic Elemental weapon from Drake for a Glaive with thunder as well if you want, but again, I kind of like the idea of having that kind of blue lightning coming off of our body, so it's going to come off of our weapon as well with a bit of lightning damage, but you can put whatever you like on there. And of course, we're also going to combine this with the Darkfire Shortbow. It's the greatest hits kind of compilation out here, giving us resistance to fire and cold damage, and the ability to use the haste spell once per long rest, if, you know, we need to go supersonic, which unfortunately we don't get the invincibility, but hey, a +2 to our AC, as well as being able to get an additional action and more movement speed. There was no way I wasn't going to get haste on this build, it was just a matter of how, and this is how. It's the best way to do it. It being once per long rest does kind of suck, and the fact that its concentration can get a little bit dicey if we do happen to lose the concentration, but with the way that this build is set up, you're not likely to. So overall, I do think the Darkfire Shortbow is going to be the best thing for us in this build. So we're going to have it here. Not to use it to attack, but just for all the other benefits it gives us. Now, as for our armor and accessories. First up, for our helm, we have the Mask of Soul Perception. This is going to give us a +2 bonus to attack rolls, which is going to offset Great Weapon Master's penalty. Initiative rolls, meaning that we're more likely to go first in a turn. Because the only issue as far as being a speedster with this build, because we decided to build into strength instead of dex, our initiative rolls do suffer a little bit. Meaning that despite us being as fast as we are, we might not be the first one in combat. So we need to be a bit careful for that, but this is going to help with that. It's also going to help us with perception checks. Again, Sonic is moving faster than the speed of sound. He needs to be able to take note of his surroundings quickly to not, you know, run into a wall and immediately die. We're also going to get detect thoughts. Just kind of ignore that, doesn't really matter, but it's a bonus. Don't really need it, but it's there. Next up, you have 3 options for your cloak. I've gone with the Cloak of Protection just to give us a bit more for our armor class and saving throws, because I'll be honest, without that, our armor class usually sits around a 16, which is okay, but not great. 18 is still kind of pushing our luck a little bit, but it's better than nothing. But the other options you can grab are the Cloak of Cunning Broom, which allow you to, whenever you disengage, you create a foggy cloud, meaning that you become obscured and can move without provoking opportunity attacks. This is kind of like you speed away so fast you leave a dust cloud behind you, which obscures your enemy's vision. There's also the Cloak of Displacement, again playing on the blue blur idea. This basically gives you the effect of the blur spell at the start of all of your turns until you take damage, making it so your enemies have disadvantage on attack rolls against you. Now, you might think this would be the best option for the build, and you're probably right, but in my testing, my luck was so poor that even with the disadvantage on attack rolls, I'd still get hit fairly often. It wasn't until I took the steps to bump up our AC as a base that this started to become a bit more effective and we were able to dodge more attacks. And we have patient defense as well, so if you don't mind spending a key point and a bonus action to get the same effect, you can technically have the higher AC and the kind of blur effect as well. But the Cloak of Displacement will absolutely work on this build, but I do think the Cloak of Protection might be a bit more generally useful. I don't know, I think it might depend on the situation, so you can flip and flop back between them as you see fit. Next up though, we have the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation as our final piece of clothing for the build. Whenever the wearer succeeds a saving throw against a spell, they regain a bit of hit points. That's nice, but not really necessary. The main thing we're here for though is the +2 to our armor class, which is huge, as well as if an attack misses us, we can make an unarmed strike against that attacker immediately as a reaction. I'll be honest, this is mainly here for the +2 to armor class. I originally used the Garb of Land and Sky, because if you use Step of the Wind Dash while wearing that, your next attack gains advantage and an extra 1d6 force damage, which I was originally going to use to obviously, power Great Weapon Master and such like that, but it felt a bit too resource intensive, as well as the fact that I wanted a bit more consistent advantage, because only getting advantage on one attack instead of all of them did kind of suck. And again, it was just way too resource intensive, and that was only a +1 to our armor class, and again, I needed more armor class. So I think the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation is the best overall, but if you want to try the Garb of Land and Sky, that is also an option. And for the early game, I would say the Mighty Cloth is probably your best bet, because in the early game I have recommended the Gloves of Dexterity to kind of push your Dexterity score up so you can dump Dex, and then put that into other things like Constitution and Wisdom. So you are going to want that kind of in the early game. So instead of going for something like the Graceful Cloth, which would give us more dexterity, the Mighty Cloth giving us more strength, up to 20, would just be a bit of a better thing for our damage in the early game, as well as we cannot be pushed against our will and have advantage on saving throws against being restrained, which does kind of feel like it makes sense for Sonic. As well as before getting the Charger feat, we would get kind of a minor version of that with Bull Rush, allowing us to charge forward without provoking opportunity attacks, dealing a little bit of damage and potentially knocking enemies prone. It says it's only available while ranging, but this is just because the description is pulled directly from the Barbarian feature. You don't need to be a Barbarian, you can just use this regardless. So I would say in the early game, grab the Mighty Cloth and then swap to the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation, sacrificing a little bit of power for more defense, which I think is important once you hit Act 3, but in the early game, go crazy with those Tavern Brawler hits. And again, if you want to make up that difference in strength, you can grab the Potion of Everlasting Vigor if you want. Like I said, for the early game, you're going to be using the Gloves of Dexterity, but when you get the Amulet of Greater Constitution in Act 3, you're going to swap these out because you're going to move your points around with a respec, and then you're going to use the Sparkle Hands, also obtained in Act 1. On a hit with an unarmed attack, the wearer gains 2 lightning charges, and while imbued with lightning charges, attacks against metal constructs and foes wearing metal armor gain advantage. This is one of the ways we can consistently gain advantage against a lot of the enemies in the game. Not all, but a lot. Not to mention, we're also going to gain lightning charges as well, which is going to give us a +1 bonus to attack rolls and an additional 1 lightning damage. So basically all of our attacks gain a +1 to attack and damage, which is awesome. That helps offset Great Weapon Master, and with all of the attacks we do in a turn, that 1 lightning damage is going to build up really quick. As well as if we gain 5 charges, they are consumed the next time we deal damage, and we just get to hit with an additional 1d8 lightning damage. We're basically going to have both buffs from this up constantly because of Flurry of Blows and the amount of times we can attack in a single turn. So the Sparkle Hands is going to be great, giving us advantage on most enemies in the game. However, obviously not every foe is, constructed of metal or wearing armor. So I'll quickly dive over to this now. We do have the Risky Ring here. However, I would say this is only going to be on if you are in an encounter that doesn't meet the requirements for the Sparkle Hands advantage, which is why I would replace it with the Killer's Sweetheart whenever you're not using the Risky Ring to basically get a guaranteed critical hit every long rest, or whatever other ring you can fit on. So if you're up against an encounter that is mainly like beast or shadow monsters, like something in Act 2 or something like that, you're definitely going to want to swap out your rings to the Risky Ring every so often, but feel free to play around with the ring usage here, because again, the Sparkle Hands is going to get a lot of use, because many of the game's enemies at least wear armor. Otherwise, you are going to have to kind of swap out the Risky Ring as you see fit to be able to get that advantage to help with Great Weapon Master. So you're going to basically want to have advantage all the time in some shape or form, whether that's through the Sparkle Hands or the Risky Ring. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. And then finally, for our equipment, we have the Linebreaker Boots. I've made a few builds with these boots already, and so some of you may have seen this coming, but this is one of our main ways to turn speed into power. Once per turn, when you dash, you gain Wrath for 2 turns. Wrath is a +1 bonus to damage rolls with melee weapons for each turn of the condition remaining. This can stack up to 7 times, meaning that if you dash enough times, you gain a +7 to your damage. With Great Weapon Master, that's a 17. With Charger on top of that, adding your proficiency bonus as well, that's an extra 5. That's a lot of damage. That is, like I said, directly turning speed into power. But you may think, oh, you know, it's only once per turn, and it's only 2 turns, like, you're going to have a hard time stacking that up. That's if the boots worked as the description describes, which they don't, because Larian is lying to you. Not only does this not have a once per turn restriction, meaning that with just 2 dashes you get nearly the maximum amount of charges, that being 6, because you don't gain 2 turns of Wrath, you gain 3. Now you may be thinking, well, surely they're going to patch this out, but I'll be honest, I've been using these boots since I would say patch 4, and despite the fact that I've shown this in multiple videos and people have pointed it out multiple times, Larian still hasn't fixed it, at the very least not even just for honor mode. So I think the Linebreaker boots are here to stay. This may get patched in patch 8, however, the basic effect that it's supposed to have is still really good for this build. Yes, it will be a slight nerf, but it just means you get your charges slower. You'll still get the same amount of charges, and technically it would free up a bonus action on your first turn to do whatever else you want to, so, you know, whatever. Basically, the Linebreaker boots are just so incredibly strong with the setup that we have. Do note, though, that Wrath only works with melee weapon attacks. It's not going to work with our unarmed strikes, unfortunately, but hey, that's why we're using a sword. So yes, between everything that we have here, we just have so many different ways of adding on to our attack, basically allowing us to do massive amounts of damage over a butt-ton of attacks in a single turn. So anyway, moving on to the accessories. We have the Amulet of Greater Health, which sets our Constitution to 23 and gives us advantage on Constitution saving throw checks. This is great, because not only, if we're not using the Risky Ring, this basically means that haste is always going to be up no matter what, but even if we are using the Risky Ring, we're negating the disadvantage on concentration saving throws, just making it neutral, and with a 23 in Constitution, that's still going to be more likely to succeed than not. But like I say, if you don't have to use the Risky Ring because the Sparkle Hands is pulling its weight, then this basically just means constant haste uptime with a massive pool of HP. Yes, it's an Act 3 option, but you can get it right away at the start of Act 3 by going straight to the House of Hope, stealing it, and then leaving. There's no consequence for doing this as long as you pass all the checks. So yeah, as long as you have a good rogue in the party, which, well, hey, you know, it will work out just fine. And finally, this is a free slot, but of course we've got to take Crusher's Ring. It says Emerald Ring, ignore it. We're going to take Crusher's Ring here to gain a +3 meters to our movement speed. Yeah, that's all it does, but hey, more movement speed is more movement speed. So yeah, that is the build. I will say quickly before we move over to the combat footage that this is that the camp clothing I have here is modded. This is the Leather V1 and the Leather Boots 2, both coming from the Fear Tailor's Camp clothing mod, and which is available on all platforms, as well as being coloured in the blue dye, which is base game, but also the shoes here, to get that slightly red colour, this was about as red as I could get it, are coloured in the helm dye from the Faerunian Colours mod, again available on platforms. And I kind of like the colour scheme here, because you get the blue on the arms, but kind of the brown in the middle. It kind of gives that Sonic colour scheme a little bit, but not being too obvious, I would say. Well, maybe it is a bit obvious, but who knows. But yeah, oh yeah, here's the Garbled Land and Sky. Meant to show that off earlier, but there you go. You can read the description there. But yeah, that is the build, and like I say, this one's pretty damn powerful. I think this is probably some of the most damage I've ever gotten in a single term of one of my builds. It may kind of... It's not going to have as much single attack damage as some of my, like, overpowered paladin smite builds, for example. Like, where I just go for absolute nova damage for critical hits. But with the sheer amount of attacks you get, because think about it, with haste, you can make 4 attacks with your action, each of them being affected by Great Weapon Master, one of those attacks being affected by Sneak Attack, all of them being affected by the extra d4 from the Shriek from Valor Aluv. Then also with the 3 bonus actions following that, that could be Charger Weapon attacks, which add our proficiency bonus. That could be Stunning Strikes, that could be Flurry of Blows, which is a bunch of attacks in a turn, each doing massive damage with Tavern Brawler. Like, so think about it this way, right? Even if you use, let's say we use 2 Charger Weapon attacks in a turn, using our movement speed, with a +7 on top of everything else you see here, then each of those 4 attacks that we can do, like 2 Charger Weapon attacks, each of which getting an extra d4 thunder damage, and then increasing that with Flurry of Blows, which is also going to get the thunder damage. Like, I'm sorry, it's just... It is an insane amount of damage. If anything survives a single turn against you, I will be surprised. Like, you can just go absolutely insane on a lot of things, especially if you have party members backing you up and doing extra damage as well. Like, again, this is probably some of the most damage I've ever put into like a single turn on a build before, so yeah, go absolutely crazy with it. And again, you have the movement speed to boot. In the combat footage that you will have seen, I decided to test like just how far I could actually go with my movement speed, and I accidentally left the combat encounter, which was a bit awkward because I had to kind of waddle back over to and lost some of my turns and my buffs because I actually went too far. And I didn't even realize that you could just go far enough that the combat encounter would automatically end without you having to flee. I genuinely did not know that was a thing because I'd never tried it. So the fact that I just went so far that the game was just like, yeah, well, combat's done. I'm just like, wait, really? I wasn't even trying to get the maximum amount of speed, but yes, I would say with the amount of movement speed you can get on this build alone, you can pretty much reach any corner of the battlefield without issue. And even then you have like Charger to gain that extra little bit of distance that doesn't actually use your movement speed if you really need to get someone who's like, I don't know, in another country. Like, this build's... It kind of does everything that I want from like a speedster build. You've got the speed and you've got the power that comes with such speed. Like, again, you're using your momentum to deal massive amounts of damage. I mean, yes, a lot of it is flavor. I mean, you're not actually like running to get the attack boost. You just have the ability to use your movement speed to get really far. And again, this whole build, it's somewhat of a glass cannon, but obviously not really because we have a big amount of HP. But you do have to be a bit careful because if a whole team does manage to gang up on you and get some solid opportunity attacks on you, that is going to be a problem. Otherwise, you have a lot of options for dealing with that. So get in, do your massive amount of damage, and get out, and hopefully the enemies will just attack the nearest party member instead of you. But again, in my solo testing for this build, it did fantastically. Like, the only issue you can kind of have with this build is if by some miracle your enemy manages to knock your concentration down, usually by knocking you prone. That can be a problem, so watch out for that, because that means you're completely vulnerable for a turn, but you should have enough HP to survive whatever onslaught comes your way. But yeah, like I said, I had a ton of fun with this build. Again, it's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I don't expect this video to be very popular, but I do think that this build is a very, very fun time, and if you want to play a speedster character, this is probably the best way to do it. Maybe you could make some adjustments here or there depending on what you want out of the build, but I do think with this you're just going to have so much speed and so much power, but it's just going to feel amazing to play. Although I do see dropping Tavern Brawler on this build, bumping up your wisdom, making a bit more of a well-rounded character, but otherwise I think what we've got here is damn well good enough for me. So yeah, that is the build and that is the video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.